Hi, my name is Andy Couturier with theopening.org, and today's short talk will be about how to set up a group with your friends or writing colleagues that allows you to have a longer period of time to get feedback as opposed to just short segments where everyone reads for 3 or 4 minutes. So I recommended this to a few of my students recently, and so I'm putting together just a short video on few suggestions that you might want to use to make it go as well as you can based on some of my years of experience of teaching writing. So briefly, I had suggested to several students like, well, in class it's great, you each get, a few minutes of reading, a number of minutes of feedback, and I have other videos where I talk about that feedback method. I'm not going to get into that right here. I'm going to talk more about when you have a half a day or maybe even 3/4 of a day for people to bring their thick manuscripts to each other and have people read through large sections, how to make that go as best as you possibly can. So the reason for even doing this is to get a sense of someone reading not just a little fragment of your book, which can give you a lot of information, but could really, in some ways, obscure things, or they didn't understand something, but you'd actually mentioned it before because you read a passage later on. So the idea is that you get to sit down and really get a longer section. Now, there's two ways to do this. One is to have is to read out loud, right? The problem with that is we can speak at, I don't know, what the, 100 words a minute or something like that, but you can actually read somewhat faster than you can listen. So you actually get more text read. Also, you just get a larger context if you have more pages. So there's, as I said, two ways to do it: is read it out loud or to bring in copies. Now, some people balk at printing. I recommend that you figure out how that can work for you. I think if you think about having a wood fire on a cold day, you're using up more firewood than reams and reams of paper. So I think you recycle the paper when you're done, but you're a writer and you use paper. And if you have 4 or 5 people there, bring in 4 or 5 copies, even if it's several hundred pages. It's great if you can have someone read that, and I actually had people do that for my book. So what you want to do is think about how many people are there. So first of all, time is always the big issue. How much time do you have? So if everyone's showing up at 9 in the morning, figure out, can everyone stay till 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and will you need a break? Be serious about that amount of time, because the last thing you want is to have the whole day go through and the last person, everybody's like, oh, I'm just tired, it's 15 minutes left, I'm so sorry, I've got to leave. And that last person feels like, wait a minute, I just gave hours of feedback to everyone else and no one's gotten a chance to read mine, or getting short shrift. So prevent that from happening. Be really serious and have someone who's a good timekeeper. Be honest if you're not a good timekeeper. If you're willing to be the timekeeper, be solid about it. It's 45 minutes per person if that's what you decide, and that's 45 minutes for everything. Go ahead and put in your breaks, whatever you're going to need. So once you have that set up, is how many people there are, how many minutes per person, and whether they're going to be read aloud, which means fewer pages, or whether everyone's going to quietly read Joe and Barbara and Colin and Dennis's piece. How much time you have for that and how much time you have for feedback. Generally, I think it's 1 to 2 ratio is pretty good. So if you have half an hour of reading, then you give an hour of feedback to each person. 20 minutes of reading, 40 minutes of feedback, that kind of thing. And that's for everyone in the room. Now, if you have fewer people, if you have only 2 or 3 people, you can change that ratio. But if you want everyone to speak on everyone's piece, then you should set it up that way, given the time. And don't waste too much time thinking about how it should work. So try to see who's a good meeting facilitator and say, okay, we're going to spend 20 minutes deciding on how the format is, or you can decide it in advance by email, but that's a little inefficient because there's a lot of stuff going back and forth. 20 minutes to figure out our format, and then we get started. Now, this next thing you want to think about is if people are reading it, what kind of feedback do you want to get, and how do you want to get the feedback? I'm going to actually deal with that in quite a bit more detail in a different video, which will be useful to anyone who's just giving their entire book manuscript to some beta readers, is one of the ways that people talk about it. People who are reading a draft for you, so they're not necessarily an agent or a publisher or your final readership, but someone who's willing to give you feedback on it. So I'm going to deal with that later, but let me say a few things. Well, one thing I found very useful is to have people simply underline with a straight underline phrases that are powerful, meaningful, that touch them. Perhaps it's a whole paragraph, then maybe it's a vertical line next to the paragraph on paper. Now you can do this all electronically. I personally think paper is a better way to do it. But whatever it is, make sure you have a really clear format and everyone understands how it is. Now, some people may want to have like, oh, which parts confused you or which parts were put you off or in some ways didn't work for you. You can use, if you decide to do that, and you may not want to do that, and I would caution you against just randomly saying, tell me what you think is wrong, because actually you can get into a lot of trouble with that. You can put a squiggly underline under a phrase, or you were confused, you didn't know. It doesn't mean it's wrong or bad, but somehow it bumped for you. And that's the main thing I want to say is the piece, in and of itself, it doesn't need anything. That is not something that a piece of writing has a capacity of. It didn't have the capacity to change a tire, it doesn't have the capacity to go for a walk on the beach, and it does not have the capacity to need something. It is a desire that a particular reader wants in a particular mood on a particular day for that particular piece. So avoiding that and avoiding any kind of critiquing, this is wrong, and I'm going to grab the steering wheel and tell you where, I'll take a left, oh, go this way. Then you're writing by committee. You have a weakness in the ensuing writing because everyone's telling you what's wrong with it. And that's unfortunately the main model. So avoid that. Your main goal is to send everyone home excited to do new writing. And please care for each other. It is unbelievable the amount of damage that people can do to each other's spirit, much less ability to write or motivation to write, by a careless remark or something that's painful that really just didn't need to be said that way. So use as much etiquette and sweetness as you can when you're giving people feedback. Okay, so if you'd like to watch the video on the kinds of feedback you can give and the kind of feedback that has been useful to a lot of my students over 20 years, watch for the next video, and it's going to be called Getting Feedback from Your Beta Readers. Okay, but I do recommend that you get together with a group of people